but welcome to the talk. So this is one of my favorite topics because really setting up kind of a proper nutritional base through infancy. Really, I start working because, again, the focus is really reproductive care. So I start working even in preconception counseling and kind of pre-fertility visits. I do a lot of fertility care, kind of setting up the health of both parents for the infant, for the conception. And then the next most important start is definitely going through a proper food introduction. You'll see it's very different what we use compared to what the Canada Food Guide is out there. So it might be a little bit of some controversial topics coming up. I really inspire a lot of discussion, so feel free to put up your hands. I hope that's okay for the video, but we're just gonna go ahead and do that. So put up your hands, ask questions, go ahead. So you heard my bio, that's pretty much what I do. So I'm the professor here for the Nutrition Through the Lifespan program. I teach it at both campuses, Toronto and the Mississauga, and we go through for nutritional lifespan. It essentially is following that preconception, what you would do for preconception counseling. You'd walk through kind of the pediatric health issues, anything that you might want to troubleshoot earlier on in infancy or as the baby's developing, even in utero, then through childhood diseases, adolescence, looking through as that teen then moves into kind of women's health or men's health, and we follow through the geriatrics, and we kind of do the whole lifespan. So it is a really, really interesting course. I love teaching it, and this is one of my favorite topics in there. So hopefully you get to learn a lot. So what we'll get started with is blew past that slide. I'm also not the greatest with technology, so you'll learn that. But it's kind of funny in class. It's like, haha, you can laugh at me. So first thing we're gonna do is the introduction to solid foods. So this is the optimal infant nutrition. How many of you are parents here? Oh, good, we have a fair sampling. In my classes, not a lot of people are parents, so this is brand new. But for you parents, you'll kind of have probably gone through these stages already, so at least you get a little bit of a better sense. If you don't, hey, this is great because it's better to learn this ahead of time anyway. And if you didn't follow this, no guilt here, no judgment. That's fine. You do the best that you can with the information you had at the time. So yes, you're learning this, but don't go and say, oh man, I really did that wrong for my child. No, it's not that this is the right for everyone fit. So this is just kind of what we teach, but you're gonna adapt it, of course, based on ethnicity, based on ages, based on different health challenges for different infants as well too. So first things first, how many people here knew that babies are born with a leaky gut or sieved or intestinal lining? Good, couple people already. Excellent, excellent. So babies are born with an intestine that isn't fully sealed. The reason for that being that breast milk proteins are quite large, so the proteins in the milk are quite large. They need to be able to pass through with the baby's immature digestive system. So the baby's system can't break those down fully yet on their own. Yes, breast milk, we're gonna talk about it, contains some proteins that actually help break down those larger enzymes that help break down those large proteins, but they won't break down fully. So the intestinal lining needs to be gapped at that point in time. Conveniently, breast milk also packages in a growth factor called epidermal growth, and you're gonna growth factor. You're going to have to excuse my writing. This one's actually pretty legible, pretty proud of that, but sometimes I just go through so fast. So please, if there's any clarification, let me know. But the epidermal growth factor is already packaged in breast milk. What it's designed to do is actually seal up that intestinal lining over time. You can't keep that intestinal lining gapped, otherwise you're gonna get so many different proteins, you can get bacteria come through, you can get allergens come through. So this is really a huge key. Unfortunately, when we go to a formula feeding, formula doesn't contain the epidermal growth factor, so you may have to do a little extra work just to get that intestine sealed correctly. A lot of times, again, if you introduce something that may be an allergen, maybe an irritating particle early on, because there's gaps in that intestinal lining, it can come through and trigger an immune response. So typically you've heard of a lot of kids having either gluten sensitivity issues or casein. In dairy, it's typically casein, not necessarily the lactose that's often the issue, it's the casein, which is a protein in there. So a lot of these are they're very large particles, they're kind of pointy or kind of irritating. So if you have gaps in that intestine and this large particle comes through, sometimes it catches, it can tear a little bit, create some inflammation, and then the body sends the immune system to say, hey, what's happening here? What's attacking us? And it starts to mount a response. So that's often where you start getting those sensitivities programmed very early into a system. So we're going to look at ways to hopefully mitigate that and kind of reduce the amount of allergies that are produced if you aren't able to breastfeed. Because yes, we advocate that breastfeeding is the best thing that you can do, but there are some cases where it's just not possible for a mom. So keeping that in mind. So that's the first one. So babies aren't born with that digestive tract fully developed yet. They're missing the enzymes. The digestive system is a little bit gapped, although the epidermal growth factor in breast milk really helps it. The other part is the immune system. They don't have that barrier system. They have a little bit of it. I won't get into all the different types of antibodies like we do in class, but they have a very basic immune system that was passed on through the mom via the placenta, but it really isn't enough to now kind of buffer them for the rest of life. That immune system essentially drops off completely by about 6 months. Breast milk is this phase of breast milk called colostrum up here. I should have got a pointer, but this one over here, colostrum. So colostrum in breast milk is a very rich source of our immunoglobulins. So immunoglobulins are essentially our immune system that gets passed on. So they're the defense. It's especially important for anything that's found at barrier membranes. So your whole digestive tract, your nasal mucosa, your oral mucosa, your eyes, your skin. So this basically gives you a sealant for the baby. And that again is passed on in breast milk. Formula does have a little bit of immunoglobulins. It's bovine sourced for the most part because it's cow-derived formulas that we'll talk about just generally. But unfortunately, it's not the right kinds. Interestingly enough, this immune system also works almost as a type of kind of vaccine to whatever's around you. So let's say there was a really bad flu. I have a 9-month-old baby right now. So let's say there was a bad flu going around and I was exposed to it. Well, my immune system's nice and strong. I'm starting to mount an immune response. I'm starting to make the antibodies because I saw that strain and said, hey, I've got to build up just in case I catch it. So what's happening with my baby, I'm still breastfeeding. So I would actually, when I breastfed her, pass on the immunoglobulins that are already pre-designed for that specific strain of flu that was going around in the environment. I picked the flu, but it could be anything that's going around in that environment. So it's an automatic vaccination with 100% accuracy because it's to the right strain. So it's a really, really nice way of passing on a very strengthened immune system. Actually, one of the things we recommend as a little tip or trick that you're going to learn is for babies, if you can pump breast milk and save some as an emergency stash, it'll last in a chest freezer. Breast milk will last probably, you're looking at 6 months or longer. Some cases, depending on where it was put away, it can last even up to 8 months to even a year, I've seen. Taste breast milk so that, or have your parents taste the breast milk so that they know when breast milk has gone off. You can tell the difference in the taste. You want to taste normal so that you can try and see if it's gone off. You make sure you don't use that. But you want to store that emergency stash so if the kid ever gets sick, all you do is take them off solids, put them on that breast milk fast. A day, maybe even 2 of a breast milk fast, phenomenal. 1 drop of breast milk contains 1 million white blood cells. So it is an amazing, amazing way, without medication, herbs, anything, like amazing way to respond the system. You have those antibodies that are already passed through as a boost, and you have all those white blood cells that are passed on as a boost. Never mind all the other stuff in breast milk that we won't get into right now because we'd be here forever. So that is a nice little tip and trick of the trade that I use in practice, and it works really, really well. So colostrum, that's that first immune system that gets passed on. And if you're really curious about which immunoglobulin, it's this one over here, the IgA. So these are, you may have also known them as immunoglobulins. You may have heard them called as antibodies. So they essentially go out and scavenge for any germ that they find, any microbe that they find, and grab it. They attach to it. They're little Y-shaped organisms. They attach to that germ and then send it to a white blood cell to say, hey, look what we found. Let's start either mounting a response or creating some inflammation, or what should we do with this? So there are our scavengers out there defending us. Then we have our good bacteria. So that's also found in breast milk. So our bacterial flora, again, won't really fully get into it, but really your birth history really dictates what flora you're going to have. I don't know if any of you have heard they're working on the gut microbiome. Yeah, some of you have heard. So it's the microbiome. Look into it if you haven't. But basically what they're doing is this huge project that they're mapping. It's like the genome project, but they're mapping out all the flora in our intestines. It's upwards of 500 species. Typically, when you look at a probiotic supplement, you're maybe using 11, max we're using 20 different bacteria. So we haven't really reached the limit of what we know about this bacteria, how certain diseases have certain strains that help versus certain strains that really do nothing at all, certain strains that might be deficient in people that have Crohn's, for example, colitis, etc. So really do a little bit of research around this if you're interested. But the microbiome right now, what we're being studied is babies, essentially. So we're looking at why some babies would have completely altered flora compared to others. And it seems, again, it's the birth history that really does it. Things like if it was a vaginal birth versus C-section, or if the mom, even if it was a vaginal birth, had the antibiotics or IV antibiotics, if they had an epidural, usually if they had not an epidural, C-section, usually they're linking you with antibiotics with it too. That's going to disrupt the flora. How many how many caregivers at the hospital, if it was a hospital birth versus a home birth, that changes too. How many people touched that baby after it was not conceived, sorry, I'm having a brain moment. After it was delivered, that would have been awkward. After it was delivered, how many people actually touched that baby? How many people that weren't family-based? So you'd carry kind of the similar pattern, not identical, but similar pattern to your family. How many non-family members or people that were visiting touched that baby and seeded that baby in the first couple weeks of birth? Did the baby get washed right away, or were they left to recolonize? Were they skin to skin right away? There's so many factors to consider. So again, this is what we learn and what we teach is a proper seeding process for a baby. But the microbiome is really giving us a glimpse. And then we're looking now at diet down the road, and they're mapping. You've probably seen it on Facebook if you follow kind of health circles. But on Facebook, there's all these people posting the microbiome of several babies throughout the globe and how completely different that bacteria is. So some bacteria is passed through breast milk for sure, and that is a great way to rebalance as long as the mom is rebalanced. So not just looking at the baby health, you really need to look at the parents as well. But the birth history for that child really determines their start in life. Bacteria can do anything from hormonal balance to immune system repair, or immune system strengthening, to making some of our essential nutrients like our B12 or vitamin K to, I don't know, they do so much, detoxifying the body. There's so many factors that are accounted for by that good bacterial flora. It really is, to get the best start, you really try to pay attention to a good seeding protocol.
Sorry, maybe a silly question, but are the microbes just in the colon or in the small intestine?
Not a silly question. They're in the small intestine too. They're actually everywhere. Vaginal flora, they're on your skin, they're in your nose, everywhere. So it is about a full body kind of rebalancing. So that's important. And again, so the micro in breast milk, it's passed on, and then it continues to stabilize until the age of 2, and that's when their microbiome now becomes independent of the parents. Then at 6 months of age, typically that's when we start to see the baby produce their own enzymes. Typically until then, breast milk already packages in. So for example, lactase that digests lactose. So lactose is a sugar that causes a bit of an intolerance in dairy. Breast milk already passes on lactase, some lactase. The baby is born with larger amounts, but it passes on that lactase so that the baby can digest it. Lipase, which is an enzyme that digests fat, the breast milk packages in that fat digesting enzyme so that the baby can break down that fat. So we're not having those additives to formula. It would be great if they can add it on, but unfortunately when they process formula, it destroys the enzyme, so they don't have that in there. So it is a little bit, formula-fed babies, if you've been around babies, they have a very odorous stool compared to babies that are breastfed. Really, the stool isn't very odorous. For formula-fed babies, it's the leftover fat that actually accounts for that stinky little stool. But it's at the fact that they don't have the lipase in there. Kind of would be simple if formula companies just added a little lipase after processing. I don't know why they haven't done that. I think they haven't found a way to stabilize yet. I also go off topics, not off topic, interesting notes. We call them clinical pearls. Throw pearls all over you, but just sometimes keep me on track if I do sway over, because I want to get to everything. This is how class goes. It's so interesting, and everyone just wants to know more. Okay, so you want to make sure that you are, so for a holistic introduction schedule, we recommend, in a perfect world, again, everyone's scenario is different, but we recommend possibly exclusive breastfeeding until the age of 6 months. So cute, that's okay. Until the age of 6 months. And then at 6 months of age, that's when we start our solid food introduction. So that's one of the ideas that we follow, and it's because at 6 months you start to produce your own enzymes. There's a gag reflex for babies. Some babies suffer from a lot of kind of reflux disease, or they spit up a lot. That starts to go down at around the 6 months of age. And then the IgA levels in the intestines, again, start to increase at that point. So you don't have to be as cautious of sterilizing everything. Should still be running clean, like wash your stuff and boil it, but it doesn't have to be as OCD about that. So solid food typically. Also around 6 months of age is when babies start to sit up on their own, and you need, who eats lying down? Like you need to be able to sit up, at least solid food, you need to be able to sit up unsupported to be able to eat that. Solid food. So that's an important one. The other factor I would say with waiting till about 6 months of age is that babies are born with that tongue thrust reflex. So everything they eat, they'll like push their tongue out. They're not going to keep anything down, and it's going to be a very messy experience. So around 6 months, that starts to die down. So you are able to keep foods into the baby a little bit longer. The allergy connection, I already kind of went into this, which is nice, but this is the more scientific look at the specific cytokines or inflammatory particles and the response of the white blood cells and the particular immune response that gets set up. So for those of you that are really interested in that, this is from an immunology journal, but it walks you through essentially, this is your leaky gut. So these are the intestinal, the cells that line that small intestine. These are the tight junctions, we call them. So they're supposed to always be nice and sealed in adults. You've probably heard the term leaky gut for adults too, or malabsorption syndrome, or intestinal permeability might be the other phrase for it. For babies, it is normal. It just should seal up normally by about 6 months, which is why we start that introduction around that 6 months of age. Introduced a little early, those gaps are still too open, so those large protein particles come in through. When they come through, so this would be maybe a casein or a gluten molecule or something that wasn't broken down properly enough, or if the kid had maybe a peanut allergy, for example, if the parents were allergic. So again, these proteins come through and the body actually targets them. This is a little advanced, but the body actually targets them, binds them, and starts showing them to, we call them antigen presenting cells. We start showing this antigen or this foreign body that invaded, starts showing it to the immune system saying, oh, we found this, what is it? And what do we do? Do we mount a response? Do we start to obliterate it? Do we develop more antibodies? The more antibodies or copies you make of the one holding that antigen, so that it starts to photocopy itself, so they're always scavenging for that antigen, the more of them you make, the bigger allergic response you're going to have. So this is what sets up a lot of kids too. You might see allergy responses like eczema. You often see ear infections, and asthma tend to be the top three, as well as food sensitivities. But those three together are, we call it the allergic triad. So the allergic triad. And you've probably heard of many kids that have the three. And so that one's the eczema, the asthma, and you're seeing ear infections as well with these kids. So it does tend to go together. They don't have to develop it all at once. Typically what I see is the kid either starting with an ear infection that just they get them consistently, or that they're starting with an eczema. Asthma doesn't typically come until later, but it is an allergic triad. It is an atopic reaction, but it's coming from this. There are other things that contribute, for sure, and we'll talk about a few of them, but this is one of the major ones that leads to a lot of these sensitivities. And those can stay. So if you made those replications, so if you made copies of that antibody and you have, so let's say it was a gluten particle that came through, so now I have these antibodies that always react to gluten. If I keep having gluten, I'll build more and more and more and more of a response. And this, even for adults, is a bit of a syndrome that happens because we can have the leaky gut. Over time, you actually can start developing a reaction to certain foods. The best analogy I can give you is if I scraped my skin one time, no big deal. But if I'm going like this every single day, several times a day, well, what's going to happen? I'm going to get a red welt. I'm going to get some inflammation. I'm going to get some irritation there. And that's what we're doing internally. It's a very delicate mucosa, and these particles are very allergenic. They're very rough. And what we're doing is just scraping over and over. If anyone has tried to be, I'm not advocating gluten-free, but if anyone has tried to be gluten-free ever, it is so difficult because we've decided to now put it it in everything. It is very hard to wipe out, and this is what we've done. We've created these sensitivities. They're not true allergies, and in the course we explain what's a real allergy and what's not, but it is a sensitivity reaction. So we've just created more and more of these antibodies. We've never given the body a break, toned them down, healed up that lining where it was supposed to be healed, and then we should be able to introduce the food, no problem. But this is what we're doing in an infant. Typically, I've seen it, not so much with gluten, but with the dairy because of the formulas. It's for babies that maybe weren't able to be breastfed. They were put on formula, and it's the casein that's equally allergenic, and that's been passing through and creating a response. So watch a little bit for those symptoms. Sometimes it could be, sometimes if cereals are introduced too early. Again, anything before that 6 months is a bit early. Some kids develop differently, so you'll see kids that start to show interest in foods and are grabbing for foods right away, even at 4 or 5 months of age. So those kids are showing signs that they might be a little more ready compared to others. So keep in mind individual biochemistry too. So that is from 6 to 12 months, we have those tight junctions, so the gut actually starts to seal up, and those allergenic foods can now be introduced at that time, but before 6 months, it's not recommended. The enzymes, so again, you want to follow the body's lead of when it can produce enzymes. The enzymes for gluten digestion don't actually begin until 12 to 18 months of age. And a lot of people do start things like cookies or crackers earlier on, so keep that in mind. And the enzymes for grains, the amylase is the enzyme that digests grains. That doesn't start until 9 months of age. So a lot of people do the pablum, so the cereals or the mums, the cookies. So again, you don't have those enzymes until 9 months. So you're having these starches, but you're not able to break them down properly. Leads to fermentation, can lead to bacterial imbalance or dysbiosis. So something to really consider is follow when the body actually shows signs that it's ready. If you don't have those enzymes, then you won't be able to break it down. And it can cause some colic as well and some discomfort for babies. This is just a little recap on breastfeeding versus formula. So we talked about the immune system difference. We talked about the potential for allergies. And with formula too, you really should try to do a little bit of research with formulas. There are so many formulas that unfortunately contain corn syrup. Corn is one of the top 5 allergens, or they contain soy oil. Soy is also one of the top 5 allergens. So even if you picked there's hypoallergenic or low allergen formulas, it just means they don't have the dairy, or they've broken up instead of that large casein jagged molecule, they have it individually as little peptides on there, or little amino acids on there. So they hydrolyze the formula, which is a good pick if you suspected there were allergies, except for the fact that if you were allergic to corn, you probably couldn't do it because it does include corn. So really look at the list of ingredients on a formula and pick. There's one actually that has MSG in it. It's a parental, we call it an elemental formula. It's hydrolyzed, so it doesn't have casein, it's hypoallergenic, but it's broken it up and added MSG's ingredient number 2 on that formula. So keep that in mind. Read and just be careful what you're doing for the kids.
Aren't there a lot of hidden terms for MSG? Like sometimes it's not just MSG.
Yep, yeast nutrient, or yes, there are a lot of hidden terms. This one is bold. It just says monosodium glutamate. It didn't even try to hide it. But yeah, there are definitely, MSG is another one we talk about in the geriatric section of our lecture, tied with some Alzheimer's. But it definitely has made a huge, huge comeback. It's almost in anything that's like flavoring is MSG now. And it's not, I always tell my nutrition students, like, just because it's natural does not mean it's good for you. It could be labeled organic. It still has MSG. Like, just read labels very carefully. But you're right, there are many hidden terms for it. We talk about them.
Brands that you like?
For formula?
Yeah.
There are a few brands that are quite good. We go through them really in depth in the program. The key with formula is it's not a one-size-fits-all, because every patient will have different requirements. Every patient may have a different allergy or a different bacterial picture or a different sensitivity or different birth history. So it's hard to say, like, pick this one without explaining my rationalization behind it. Finances are another one. Like, there's some phenomenal formulas. I really like the goat formulas, but I mean, there's nanny care formula, but it comes from the UK, and it's so cost prohibitive, and it takes months when it's held up at customs to come in. So there's great ones out there, but they're hard. I would say in the States, if you were looking for a cow-based formula, there's one called Babies Only by Nature's One. I'll write the name down for you. But that one is a pretty good formula. Again, not available in Canada. You could bring it in. Nature's One is the company. It's a really nice one. It just, I think you can get it through Whole Foods in the States and bring it in. It's a little more expensive, of course, but it is pretty good. Still has some synthetic nutrients, but it hasn't, without going into it too much in depth, there's arsenic in a lot of the rice-based, like the rice syrup they use when they don't want to use corn syrup, which is genetically modified and processed as a toxin. They use brown rice syrup. Brown rice syrup in North America contains higher levels of arsenic, so you want to be careful there. The DHA, when they add in omega-3s for a lot of the formulas, it's fungal or algae sourced, and they process it with hexane, which is a petrochemical. So this one is actually clean of those. But there are, I'd be wary, even organic brands, sometimes I'd actually even pick a conventional brand over an organic. But this is the second lecture in the course is essentially like 4 hours on breaking things down. It's a lot. There's a lot to consider. Where was I over here? Right, so benefits for mom, of course, hormonal with breastfeeding. The uterine tone shrinks back very, very quickly when you breastfeed versus when you don't. More independence with the formula. Again, dads can be, or partners can be more involved. Breastfeeding, increased bonding, although I would argue formula can do that. If you're formula feeding a baby, making sure you're doing skin-to-skin contact and allowing both parents to bond, just skin to skin. And then formula, again, added expense, even more so if you try to go for the organic or the better brands. And then breastfeeding is free, although there are gadgets if you are going to be away, like breast pumps, which tend to be expensive. And then again, the increasing of the baby's eco footprint with the formula. This is a little comparison of milk. So you have human versus animal milk versus the infant formula. And again, I talked a little bit about these. The protein in human milk is actually about 60% whey versus in animal milk, it's 85% casein. So remember I said casein, the very allergenic protein. You just look at that ratio just on its own. In a formula, they try to buffer it a little bit. The infant formulas, they try to mimic that. They're artificially manipulating, but at least they try to mimic it. But they're not getting anywhere as close as the human milk ratios that we've got. Then the fat, remember the lipase, so they can't break it down if it is a formula, unfortunately. They can't break it down as well. They can break it down some. Then with water, human breast milk, the mature milk, is 90% water. I should say it has enough as long as the mom is dehydrated. The minute the mom's dehydrated, that milk production really goes way down. So it's 90% water. That is a lot. So that's full hydration for the baby. You don't really need extra. Versus if you were doing a animal milk, you would need extra water for sure. And then for infant formula, you definitely need extra. Although infant formula, if you've reconstituted it, usually you're adding extra water at least. And then the anti-infective properties, remember those antibodies that are seen? So they're found in breast milk, tiny amounts and different kinds, not really usable ones in animal milk, none in infant formula. I should note that the anti-infective properties, so we talked about the immunoglobulins, those little Y-shaped antibodies, but breast milk also conveniently has an antibacterial, antiviral, so cute. Antiviral property called lysosome. So it actually already builds in kind of a natural disinfectant for everything. So lysosome. So this is a nice, really good antibacterial, antiviral, anything really parasitic that's put in to break down cell walls. So that is one that is missing, unfortunately, from the other two options. So if you can't breastfeed, that's sometimes not possible. You could try to bump up, so work with a nutritionist or a naturopath to figure out what might be happening in terms of maybe using some herbs. Fenugreek, blessed thistle, and fennel are kind of the top three. Goat's rue as well, but they're the top herbs that are used to help increase milk production and help with the letdown as well of milk. So that can be a good one that you supplement. Lactation consultants are really, really great if you get the right one, but there's a breastfeeding clinic at the Naturopathic College. It's Jackie Newman. He's a pediatrician, kind of a pioneer in breastfeeding in Canada, of the medical community, obviously. But this is a resource that you could try. And then La Leche League is it's a network that's spread across Canada. So it's individual groups. There's probably one in your community, I'm certain. But they're peers. They're often doulas, lactation consultants that have got together just to provide support and be a safe space for parents to discuss challenges and get tips and ideas with breastfeeding. There are also lots and lots of videos, like the Jack Newman, the pediatrician. He has a lot of resources on how to learn if your baby's latching properly or not, because that's one as well. It could be maybe milk production's not right, or maybe the baby's, there's a called tongue tie, maybe the baby's tongue tied and can't latch or suckle properly. So it's important to make sure you're investigating properly. And then for moms, again, whose formula is a mess, the Nature's One is a great pick. If you had to go conventional, I'd probably go Alimentum would be my pick. It's a hydrolyzed without MSG, and it doesn't have corn, but it does have soy oil. Again, so many factors to consider, but that one would be a good one if you think there's allergies in the family or the kid has already been on formula, let's say, and has had any of the symptoms of the triad, then maybe you would want to go on a hydrolyzed. So these are pre-digested, so it's broken down. It's not the large casein, because remember, their intestine is still gapped, so you're programming them for a response later down the road. And then homemade formulas, they do exist. I would go, the Weston Price Foundation has some recipes or some ideas. I would just be cautious if you're using that as the sole nutrition source for an infant. I'm much more comfortable with the homemade formulas if I know either there's partial breastfeeding happening and it's as a supplement, or if they've introduced solids already. Otherwise, you have to be really careful because we have really rigid standards. If that's all the baby's getting, you really need to make sure the practitioner has done their due diligence and worked up, well, how many milligrams per milliliter of iron are there? How many milligrams per milliliter of selenium or of zinc or whatever, vitamin A? So you do want to be careful, because if you got a formula that someone just threw together and said, hey, this is a great one, well, how do you know they've actually calculated for all these amounts? I haven't seen those nutritional breakdowns very much for a lot of the formulas. So do keep that in mind. If it's the only way the baby's getting nutrition, you have to make sure that it is adequate and appropriate. Otherwise, if they're being supplemented with food or with breastfeeding, then you can be a little more free. And if you do find a recipe that has that nutritional breakdown that is kind of calculated for you, do not make substitutions to the recipe just because you didn't have camu berry powder that day. Do not make up the formula then. Wait, get it, and then make it up. Or make sure that you have these ingredients on hand, because again, they've done all this work calculating. Why are you going to put the baby at a deficiency for that batch? So that's important to consider as well. But homemade formulas are good alternatives.
You said that for the baby formula, we can mix with water or rice milk. That's carrageenan-free.
So carrageenan is a seaweed. It's used as a thickener. So you find it in a lot of, like most of the Alterna milks, we call them, but most of the Alterna milks have carrageenan. Ice cream has carrageenan, anything that needs a thickener. But it causes, for many people, it causes a lot of gastrointestinal irritation. It is natural source, but it can cause some GI distress. All right, introduction style. So we're going to go through. We're going to go through the holistic food introduction schedule for babies. There is the Eat Right Ontario schedule, but is so heavily grain and dairy based. There, again, the cookies, the cereals, things like that. They don't have that enzyme until 9 months, so I would not recommend starting with that. There is this other method, which we're not going to talk about today, but there's nothing wrong with it. It's a baby-led weaning, and if you're interested, the book is called Baby-Led Weaning, so you can learn more about it. But it's just following the baby's cues. And if they start grabbing for things off your plate, you let them. So you're not pureeing, you're not cutting, you're not mushing. It's just like carrot sticks or broccoli tops or things like that. I would say just make sure, I would pair baby-led weaning with the holistic food introduction schedule to make sure you're not introducing an allergen. So the book will say something like, when the baby's ready to pick stuff off your plate, just let them. Well, if you're having a hot dog, you're gonna let the baby have a hot dog? Like, I don't think so. So follow the food introduction schedule, but you can do baby-led weaning. So it's not wrong, it's fine to do. Just make sure you're not introducing an allergen too early.
The book is called Baby-Led Weaning?
Mm-hmm. All right, preparing for introduction. So you want to feed one food at a time because you don't know if that baby's going to react or not. If you feed them 3 different things pureed together, well, how do you know it was from which specific food? Let the baby be part of the process, play with the foods, be messy. You want a good relationship with food. You want to develop and make it a proper, positive experience. And then feed the solid food at time when milk supply is low if you're breastfeeding. If most women, it's lower, production is lower in the evening, so in the evening is when you would start that solid food introduction. Otherwise, you're going to lower the appetite, and you can lower some milk supply as well. Milk works on a supply and demand. Yep.
How much do you recommend breastfeeding? Because I know people who this child is 2 years old.
So, right away. So, as I said, exclusive breastfeeding, so this is the holistic schedule. It's exclusive breastfeeding till 6 months of age, then food introduction, but you should continue breastfeeding until at least, our minimum is set at 1 year of age. It seems to be protective till about 2, and past that, not so much, but at least 1 year of age. And that's from, I should say, that's holistic and allopathic. That's from both communities saying, like, the research has shown it's protective at least till the 1.
Is there more benefit to the child if they're breastfeeding after 1?
In terms of research, hasn't yet substantiated that, so it's unknown. It seems in terms of the immune system and the support and all of that, that yes, but I can't quote a study for you saying that was supportive. Yes.
I would say that benefits to the baby are way beyond nutrition.
Oh yes, of course. There's the emotional as well.
But
Yeah.
I'm speaking from point of view of a naturally made baby. My baby, she wasn't a baby when she finally was.
Yeah. So there are, of course, this is kind of a if you can say a schedule, but remember there are so many other aspects to it as well. I should also have noted that there are parents that want to continue just breastfeeding till about a year. That's not recommended. So not introducing the food is not a good idea. At 6 months, the iron requirement really jumps, where you see in our schedule, it will be typically the iron foods that we start with. So the iron requirement, the next stage is zinc and selenium. So the requirements kind of outweigh for that child what breast milk can provide. So a lot of parents say, well, can I just continue breastfeeding and not introduce? Not a good idea. You don't have to do it right at 6 months, but definitely in that 6 to 8 month period, you want to start introducing some solids. Bowel movements, so those change, of course, with food. So if you fed someone spinach, well, you're going to get green poop. If you fed them sweet potato, it's going to be orange. So don't be alarmed, but these are signs to watch for when introducing. Mucus diarrhea can be a sign of a possible allergy or reaction to the food. You may get gas or bloating, constipation. You might see eczema, rashes, irritability. Another common one is to see like a little red ring around the anus. It's like bright and irritated. Diaper rash could be an issue, or you can even see that red ring sometimes around the mouth as well. So those are all signs of an allergy. Homemade preferable over store-bought. It's obviously you've got the control of the ingredients that you can use. You don't have the preservatives, although even, for example, I just went to a trip to Vancouver and I took my infant with me, and we make everything homemade, but I wasn't going to make it on my trip. So I tried to look at different organic brands that had a food that was appropriate for her stage. So she was at the 6 to 9 month, which will walk you through that stage, but foods that were appropriate for that stage that weren't, most of them are grain, mixed in with grains or mixed in with the meats already. And it's too early for that stage. So finding something for her, everything was preserved with citric acid, so vitamin C, essentially corn derived, but vitamin C. It made the food really, really acidic tasting. The other issue I had with it was all of the vegetables were pureed with fruit. All of them, they added fruit in. I could not find a vegetable on its own. And the problem with that tends to be, and I've seen it over and over with patients, they introduce the fruits to their kids and then do the vegetables, and the kids are rejecting the vegetables because of course the fruit is more delicious. It's sweet. They're training them for a sweet tooth. So that's an issue, is every conventional food out there, I found, at least from the organic, the brands that I looked at, definitely either it had grains or it had meat or it had fruit in it. So I ended up getting the fruit ones. Luckily, or unluckily, I guess, my kid hated them. They were, because, for example, I got the pear butternut squash. The citric acid made it so acidic. I tasted it and she kept rejecting it. I ended up having to go to Whole Foods and I was in an Airbnb, buy some, what did I buy? I bought sweet potato and I just steamed and pureed it for her because she rejected for 2 days she rejected all food because she wouldn't palate it. I had started on vegetables, she wasn't really used to so much sweet. So that's a concern, definitely. It's even the good brands out there, they're not following an appropriate schedule, and everything is added with sweetener, or a natural sweetener, but still sweetness. So again, the foods, you want to prepare them. So what I do is I puree. So you want to always like lightly steam until it's a mashable consistency of that food. You puree or hand mash or baby mill or whatever you want to use. And then I freeze them into, I have it's called the Baby Fresh. It's a tray with a lid. It's a biodegradable plastic, like sterile or stable plastic. Freeze them into cubes, do the foods individually, and then put them in little containers in the freezer, and then you can combine. Once that food has been kind of accepted by the baby, or you know there's no reactions, like I have about 20 different cubes of flavors, and then I just go and you can switch them up every single time. So again, that's the best option I think patients have been using is just these little cubes of food that they can defrost. But you definitely can, of course, make the food fresh if you wanted to every single time too. That's no problem. I find it's easier for parents that already have something fresh. So if you were eating the traditional kind of standard diet, and you're not, like if you didn't have some broccoli steamed up for your dinners, or steamed peas or carrots or whatever it was, it is harder because then you have to go out and get that just for the baby and prepare it. But if you already had some vegetable on your plate, just puree that and give it to the kid fresh at that meal. So it makes it easier when you're already following a bit of a healthier diet or lifestyle. So this is our schedule. So it starts at 6 to 9 months. So babies now have that gag reflex. Now have diminished the gag reflexes, which it should say. So they're not spitting up as much as they were before. They have a stronger, LES is lower esophageal sphincter, so the sphincter actually tightens up. It prevents everything from coming back up, and they can keep their food down. Their requirements, you're going to see they're not too different at the next stage, except for the carbohydrates. So carbohydrates here 60 grams, and at the next stage they'll be 90, and that's because of the amylase production. So remember, the amylase was the enzyme to digest starches, so that jumps at the 9 months of age. And then 2 to 4 tablespoons a day is really all they need, in addition to breast milk or formula, that should say. So in addition to the milk that they're having, it's really only 2 to 4 tablespoons, 2 to 4 ounces. It's not a lot. And you're seeing we're starting from as lower allergenic foods as we can. So these are pretty safe foods. Then 9 to 12 months is the next range. So you can see that requirement of carbohydrates has now jumped over here, so 95 grams. 4 to 10 tablespoons a day is what you would be having in addition to the breast milk. And this is where babies can now handle kind of finger foods, or they chew with their gums, so they're able to have more lumps in the food. It doesn't have to be, when you puree for an infant under 6 months or under 9 months of age, it should be like a soupy texture, like a lumpy, or not a lumpy, a smooth soup base texture, versus now it could be more of a lumpy soup. Actually, this is where you can start to do like split pea soup or some quinoa. You can see the grains, because of that amylase production, this is where you can now put in your grains, or if you wanted to do like the rusks, the teething rusks or cookies, you could do things like that here now. I would still point out that they are gluten-free, because gluten and specific enzyme doesn't come up until the 12 months. So up until now, it is still gluten-free. Oatmeal will contain some traces of gluten. So for infants, I just make sure to get the gluten-free version of the oatmeal. There's 2 kinds in Toronto. There's the babies, not the babies only, the Only Oats, or the Bob's Red Mill. Those 2 very easily available in any grocery store. But those definitely would be the ones to pick. So that's your big legume and grains, because of the carb, the digesting component. These are danger foods you still want to avoid until 12 months. So definitely corn syrup. Corn is an allergen for a lot of kids, so leave that out. Honey, even raw or pasteurized, either one, but it does carry a risk of botulism, so you want to not feed that to an infant. Choking hazards, of course. Did you know that hot dogs were the #1 choking hazard in the US? It's crazy that many kids are eating hot dogs that early, but yes. Prepared foods high in sodium and additives. And then I would say try to buy for an infant as organic as possible. If you had to choose, then just remember that, or if you know about the EWG, that's the Environmental Working Group website, they have the Dirty Dozen and the Clean 15. So the Dirty Dozen list, they update the list every year, so you have to check every year. But the Dirty Dozen list should be organic, even for the general population. I always say the Dirty Dozen and preferably dairy products. Those are my 2 picks if I had to pick something organic. Well, I guess if you were eating red meat, definitely the meats have hormones. But we'll learn about that all in the class when you become students, if you become students. So the introduction schedule continues, so from 12 to 18 months. This is where you can see a lot of the dairy. Now keep in mind, goat's milk is here, but if you've done a goat milk formula, or if the baby wasn't breastfed and you did a homemade formula aid earlier on, that would have been introduced early, and usually that's okay. Egg yolk, I'll point out, is different here. So egg yolk, egg yolk is different from the whole egg. This is egg white. Egg white is very allergenic for infants, so I move that usually to the toddler phase. So I don't introduce that very early on. But egg yolk, if you wanted to, you could. And again, this high requirement for protein is that the 12 to 18 months you get this next kind of protein kick. So you can add in, and that's why we have the animal products being allowed in. You'll also note, here's your first gluten grain. So remember, the enzyme comes at that stage. So you can do the gluten-containing grains here, but not wheat. Wheat is the only one I leave to the end. If you're doing wheat, try for organic, because it is heavily modified, genetically modified. So if you do wheat, just try for organic, but I leave that usually till the end. And then the nuts come in here at this stage as well. And then these are really good resources. Here's your baby-led weaning. Sorry, some of these came up very light. The resources for the pictures that we used, as well as this is the book that you might want to go into, and the gastrointestinal development for kids if you want to follow that along. So our next one is children's nutrition. So moving past the baby stage. Oh yes, any questions before we move on? Sorry.
The mention about wheat, I'm hearing the GMO part.
Mm-hmm.
I'm hearing a lot of conflicting stuff, whether wheat is GMO or not. Just in the talk before, she said wheat is not GMO. I mean, I don't eat wheat because I'm celiac, but just...
Wheat definitely is GMO. I wonder if she was talking about a particular strain of wheat. Is no, like a heritage.
Even in the US, is it GM or not?
Oh, it definitely is.
Even with the celiac society, when I've been to their meetings, they say wheat is not GM.
It definitely is. There was a, I wish I could cite the reference.
Wheat Belly says it is.
Yeah, well, and there was the big, what was in Canada? There was that farmer who had his crops that were cross-pollinated by a GMO strain, and it terminated them. And he ended up, I actually don't know if he's still in the process of litigation, but it's a huge trial. I wish I could remember. Does anyone know the name? It was in Canada.
Pioneer seed would be like GMO at this point, so any corn, soy, wheat that come from them, and they produce majority of the wheat, corn,
Yeah.
that we eat in North America.
It definitely, yeah.
So majority is GMO.
Yeah.
They will tell you that it's fine for you.
Yeah, but I mean, it's strange that they're denying that it's GMO though. Usually they're like, oh, it's modified, but it's safe. Yeah, but it's strange that they're saying that it's not at all. Because it's not like you could reverse that. Huh, interesting.
It's been hybridized.
Yeah.
High strain with pesticides, which we all love.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, because I asked her in the previous talk.
Which book?
The one that you just had on the last slide.
The one, oh, baby-led weaning.
Oh.
That one?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just called baby-led weaning. I can't actually see myself who the author is.
Oh.
Oh, it looks like actually it links to the website. They also have a website, babyledweaning.com. So if you just go there, that's nice and easy. Any other questions before we move on? Okay. And I have, oh no. See, just another example of my technology skills. Okay, I'm okay. We're on kind of time. So nutrition for kids, and why is that important? So again, because you're continuing the growth chart. So the first part was about setting the foundation. You're getting the good bacterial flora. You're helping to prevent allergies or types of diseases. The second part for kids, as they're going through into, I would say, past toddler years into adolescence, is kind of more the foundation for their adulthood type health. So you're looking at obesity, diabetes, osteoporosis as foundations, setting up for liver disease or liver issues, cancer, et cetera. So it's the nutritional foundation for them as they're now starting to grow, because that growth spurt becomes pretty intense at that time. So that is where you really want to focus, is on the nutrients. So pretty simple. We're going to walk through a couple. So the carbohydrates, so for infants and nutrients, For infants and children, for carbohydrates, they need 2 to 3 times as much energy than an adult or an average adult would use per body weight. There are extremely, and you've seen kids, they're running all the time. They're not sitting down for a minute, they're always moving around. They need massive amounts of carbohydrates for that. So you do see that a lot of them, and because carbs are that primary fuel for brain, a lot of the kid nutrition foods are more carbohydrate focused. They don't have as much of a protein requirement as they would have needed initially. They do still have a significant amount, but it's nowhere near the amount of carbohydrates. So where you might say, oh, they're having really starchy meals, like I should be really concerned, I want to make sure they're just having a protein and a salad. That's not the case for kids. So you do want to allow them to have those carbohydrates. It's just the quality of the carbohydrates that you have to watch for. Not the simple carbs, try to go from the more complex carbs, the more slow burning carbs, and definitely whole grains versus the processed grains, because they're going to have all the nutrients that help to break down the carbohydrates too. So blue past protein. We're keeping that in mind as well. And then protein, again, the requirement is higher. Usually protein is the building block for all tissues. It builds your immune system, the muscles, the blood, the hair, pretty much everything is a protein building block in the body, enzymes, antibodies, etc. And these are our animal products. There are some whole grains like quinoa is actually a complete protein source. Grains have protein, but you may have heard about food combining or protein combining, because they're not complete proteins. You need to overlap them. Doesn't have to be at the same meal, but you should overlap them throughout the day. So like rice and lentils, for example, would make a complete protein, but you do need to overlap. The nuts, the seeds, dairy products, etc., all will have some protein sources too. And then our fat, so fat supplies are fat-soluble nutrients. So vitamin A, D, E, and K are fat-soluble. And again, are also the nuts and seeds, oily fish. You have your omega-3s, which are key for brain development for infants and for children. I would say teens as well, and adults. But this is the major cognition. So this is the one that they've been linking with IQ, with memory retention, with facility of connecting the nerve impulses as well. This is the big one there, omega-3s. So lots of the fatty fish. You find it in some, like the flaxseed oil, hemp seed oil, but not to the degree that it is in fish. Some people have problems converting. I should say it's fish, and for the people that are vegan, sea vegetables would have high levels as well. There are vegan DHAs that are available now on the market. You do still want to limit your saturated fat. So this is the bad fat. Mostly the caution with it is animal-based, because there are natural versions like coconut oil and avocado are high in saturated fat, but they also have the medium chain triglycerides. It's a different one that you'll learn about that helps to process that fat properly, versus animal fat, really, really high levels and very inflammatory. So things like the red meat, bacon, sausages, cheese, pretty saturated, butter, ice cream, etc. And peanuts are actually high in saturated fat too. I guess I should have added coconut and avocado, but I don't, because I allow those in the diet. The nutritional requirements, so B12, very important for red blood cell formation. It's important to prevent a type of anemia that actually really attacks the neurological system. It may make you feel really dizzy, it may make you even sometimes get panic attacks and feel really weak. So that one's one that you really want to make sure they've got. And especially for kids that are growing up vegetarian, you want to make a little extra effort on getting the B12. Calcium, again, it's not just dairy-sourced calcium. Of course, go for the non-dairy versions of calcium. So your sea vegetables, tahini is one of the highest consuming, or sesame seed paste, tahini, one of those highest sources of calcium that we can get from a non-animal source. The greens, of course, but making sure if you're using greens, you need to lightly steam them, because they actually have a component that blocks the absorption of a lot of minerals. So you want to make sure you're not doing these raw greens, that you're steaming them up. So these are things like the kale, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, should say spinach on there, didn't, but spinach, turnip greens, cabbage, etc. Just a light steam or cook, and that's fine. And then vitamin D, again, really, really important. We need sun exposure for it. It's half an hour, 20-30 minutes of arms, legs exposed to the sun, which sounds easy, but not a lot of us are getting that. If you're not getting that, then you might want to get tested for your vitamin D levels and supplement where needed. I'm really an advocate of testing to see if you need it, because vitamin D can build up to toxicity levels. It's fat soluble, so anything fat soluble is going to store. It's not just going to be eliminated out. So making sure you're asking your doctor if you can run a test for that.
Would you say
I would say, I know I have this debate all the time. I would say if you're using this is the brassica family or any of these vegetables in there, what I would do is, I do this for myself, I wash them, just lightly steam them and puree them and freeze them into cubes, much like my daughter's food. I steal some of hers, throw that into the smoothie. So I'm usually cubing my kale and just throwing a cube or a couple cubes of kale or spinach into there, just because again it can build up to levels where it blocks it's phytic acid, it blocks the absorption. Also for people that have thyroid issues, as a little bonus aside, that's important too, because these are goitrogen forming foods. They can block iodine. Iron. So this is the odd smoothie every now and then, because now everyone's like, oh my God, I've been doing this wrong. The odd smoothie every now and then is fine. If you're going to be doing it every single day though, yes, definitely steam that portion up. Iron, so really, really key for kids, very important, especially if there was a history again, and this is for breastfeeding moms too, a history of anemia or low iron. You're not passing on the best amount of iron, so maybe supplementing the kid. Blackstrap molasses are actually a great way of doing that. I have I'm low on iron, so a little treat for myself. Blackstrap molasses mixed with cocoa powder or cacao powder and a coconut oil, and I make little chocolates. Then you just put them in chocolate molds or whatever it may be, or even on a wax paper, just drop a tablespoon after you mix it and freeze them. They're so tasty. Blackstrap molasses is an alternative sweetener. Super high in iron. Lots of other minerals to it, but it is delicious. At least I love it. But it could be because I'm deficient and I need it. I don't know. But that's a little tip, and it has worked really nicely for kids. And then zinc, again, important for enzyme. We know that's important for the immune system. It's really important for the hormonal system for kids as well. Some ideas, again, for kids. Yes, you're seeing grains on here, but remember, they need it. So if this is grains, and you can see these are whole grain. I didn't say whole wheat waffles, I said whole grain waffles, because you can still have grains if you're allergic to gluten. So if a kid is gluten-free, there is a whole wheat tortilla, but you can easily sub that in for a gluten-free tortilla, like the Rudy's. I picked one up yesterday, and actually it was pretty good. But you can make this still a gluten-free menu, but allow the grains in. Just make sure they're not processed, that you're not doing the white grains, you're doing the whole complex grains. So a lot of them are like quinoa as a replacement, or millet we use as a replacement if we're not doing gluten. So again, you can keep that in mind. There's a really nice, if you're gluten-free or worried about gluten for kids, or the kid reacted really early and so you want to make sure, there's a really nice cookbook called The Kid Friendly. It's for ADHD and autism, but basically because it's a gluten-free, casein-free diet. It's so delicious, the recipes in that book. It's not just for kids with ADHD and autism, but it's The Kid Friendly. Cookbook. So it's a kid-friendly ADHD and autism cookbook. So it's all gluten and casein-free, and it teaches you how to adapt the recipes yourself. There's also another one called Naturally Sweet and Gluten-Free, and I use that for even just for adults as a treat. I think they probably sell it here. It's naturally. This is basically desserts. It's sweet potato muffins, there's brownies, there's delicious cupcakes. It's so good. And again, they're not using straight sugar. She's using alternate sugars. That's a nutritionist and put it together. But naturally sweet, gluten-free, great for adults and for kids as little treats or portable snacks.
You said they use alternate sugar? What types of sugar?
Coconut sugar, typically, that's the main one she's using. She's sometimes using some maple syrup, so going more fructose-based with the sugars. She puts in, if you wanted to do agave, yeah, so she'll use maybe some agave. She does, I think, add stevia drops for some of them too. So there's some issues with stevia as well, but it is a good one. Again, you can take recipes and modify themselves. If you don't like an ingredient, just switch it out for something else. It's not like the baby formula. All right, and then
Expanding a little bit on that, issues with stevia.
issues with stevia. It's very new, and I haven't done this research myself. I should credit my husband, who also teaches at this program. He's a naturopath, and he teaches the research class. And so for his research class, he was doing some investigation on stevia because a student had asked. It turns out that stevia even at tiny amounts, seems to actually wipe out your bacterial flora, which is a big concern. I just talked about proper seeding and all of this. So it seems that maybe if you're on stevia, take a probiotic just to make sure you're balancing. Although how much of the flora is wiped out? Are the probiotics replacing the right strains? Like, there's so many other questions. That's why I said it's like a glimpse of it, because I haven't done the research myself, and this is so new. Like, even the naturopathic community hasn't really looked into it a whole lot. But yes, keep a heads up. Again, for anything you wanna ask. Any kind. Yep. All right, so lunch ideas again. So you could do lots of the little wraps if you wanted to do the whole grain tortillas. If the kid's not sensitive to corn, I come from a Hispanic background, and we do a lot of we technically don't, but we've stolen from the Mexican culture a lot of the hand ground corn tortillas that you can get. Like Kensington has a tortilleria, amazing stuff there. So those are really nice. You can even make like little quesadillas with those. They're delicious. So again, getting creative, but remembering you want to allow for some of those grains in. If you are sensitive to gluten, again, I feel like I'm advocating gluten-free lifestyle. I'm not. I don't believe in scapegoating gluten, but because I know that's a big concern for a lot of people, if you are sensitive to gluten, my favorite gluten-free pasta, because you see pasta on there, is, have you tried the Go-Go quinoa? Mm-hmm. Oh, so good. I was managing to fool my husband, who's Italian, but the Go-Go quinoa is a rice quinoa blend. It's very good, very good, not ricey or kind of gross at all. So that's a nice option for kids, because kids are sensitive. Kids will pick up, and they are so picky a lot of the time. So you can try that. You can do like a little tapas style lunch. Lunches don't have to be a sandwich. You can do like a little bento box and throw in a couple little snacks, so a little cube of hummus, some crackers. You can do a little bits of cheese, or some cucumbers, or little cherry tomatoes, whatever it may be. Just make it kind of fun and creative. Kids do tend to like picking and grazing at things, so that's an important one too to allow. Then snack ideas, you can make things on your own, like homemade granola that you can make to sprinkle on yogurt. That's very easy to do. Or there are natural, like there's a Love Child one that I'm using right now that I really like. That's like a homemade granola. You can make, again, like cookies or little muffins or little snacky kind of ingredients. Trail mixes are great for kids, especially if they're it's more that post school and then on the way to some sort of activity that maybe they're in the car. At least that's what I have. A lot of the kids are going off to hockey or sports or whatever it may be, dance classes. So keeping a container of that in the car so they can nibble as you get there, because they can't have something very heavy before they go out for these heavy practices. They're going to have to wait till after. So that would work. Yogurt with cut up fruit, the raw vegetables. You can make black bean dips or lentil dips or hummus. The eggs are a nice one. Again, apple slices, peanut butter or almond butter. I know a lot of schools are nut free, so that's going to be a barrier for a lot of kids too. The fresh fruits. I don't know why canned is there. I guess canned is a must, but fresh fruits. Dinner, so this is kind of an ideal plate that you would have. This is for adults, but for kids too, and this is a nice handy little chart on the side that gives you your serving sizes. I'm trying to give you the reference. It says Take Care Network on the bottom. If you want to Google this, it's easily found online, because that's where I found it. So this is the size for teens and adults. You can see over here. So that's the 9-inch plate. You have the measurements down at the bottom. And this one over here is a 7-inch plate, just to give you a reference of what it might be. And then that is going to be, again, the half vegetable. We're seeing about a quarter protein. Protein should be about the palm of your hand and about the thickness of a deck of cards. And then the starch, so usually it's a quarter of the starch that you're seeing. Typically, it's a cup, which is an open hand that you're seeing, isn't like amount of starch that you should have on your plate. So, yes.
In terms of the protein being the size of your pop, is that per meal or per day?
Usually it's per meal. Foods you want to limit, of course. Actually, the biggest in this category, for sure, the sugar and the preservatives tend to be it. So BHT is, has been shown in some studies to stunt growth, and that's found in almost everything, all the like cookies, anything processed that's bagged, like all of the cereals, like the kids' cereals, the typical like Frosted Flakes or Cheerios or whatever it may be, all preserved with BHT. So that's a really important one. Again, read the instructions or the ingredients on there. The artificial flavors and colors tend to be a big one, more in terms of ADD and ADHD. Any artificial color does seem to be a trigger, so keep that in mind. And then sugar, again, so important to make sure you're avoiding. So it does all of these negative things, so hormonal imbalances, increases the risk of cancers, depletes your B vitamins, increases cholesterol, raises blood sugar, triglycerides, causes kidney damage, arthritis, migraines, etc. So important to really consider for children. Not running out of time yet. One really big one that I see, this is more my preteen and teen demographic that I'm seeing this the most of, and it's the consumption of pops that keeps rising and rising and rising. So pop, we're seeing high amounts of sodium, we're seeing high amounts of sugar, high amounts of actually it's the high fructose, HFCS is high fructose corn syrup. High fructose corn syrup is metabolized in the liver like an alcohol. It doesn't really know, it doesn't recognize it, it doesn't know what to do with it, so it stores it in fat. I have a kid that's 8 years old that has fatty liver disease. She drinks about 3 to 4 pop a day. It is extreme. Her stomach is out to here. Her liver is so enlarged and so damaged. We need to do so much work to now be able to reverse it. And again, 8 years old, we're seeing this happen more and more and more. It's really high fructose corn syrup. It's not just in the Coke. Like I said, the baby formulas too had this one as well. But you are seeing it become it's become an epidemic. So that's important to look at. The other factor in pop, aside from the sugar as well, and the salt that is there to compensate for the sugar, is the phosphoric acid. And again, especially in the preteen population, phosphoric acid actually leaches calcium from the bone, and it's a large, dense molecule, so it pulls out the calcium and inserts itself, which leaves a big weak spot in the bone. So you're seeing this again in that formative period where your bones are supposed to be kind of setting up and getting the foundation to carry you into adulthood. We're seeing this as a possible contributor for osteoporosis, maybe 5 decades later, but starting in your teens. So that is really important to consider as well.
Actually, sorry, can you go back to that sugar slide?
Oh, yes. Yeah, I wonder if they put these up anywhere. Oh, right. Here. Oh, no, sorry. I will stop at this one. There. You're welcome.
Sorry, can I just clarify? So you're referring to refined sugar?
Refined, yeah, well, yes and no. Yes and no, because we've seen the sugar spike or anything that causes that. It's the insulin metabolism. So anything that might spike that insulin actually does seem to be doing it, not just refined sugar. You're right. Okay, and then this is just so you can understand a bit of the process that happens for these kids or adults. You'll certainly have adults too that are drinking more than they need to of pop. Within the first 10 minutes, it's about 10 teaspoons of sugar that hit your system. The only reason that you don't gag, when you have something really sweet and you kind of gag on it, that's why they put the phosphoric acid in. So it cuts that sweet feeling so you don't get that gag reflex, which unfortunately then alters your bone. So within 20 minutes, your blood sugar spikes, your liver responds to the insulin burst by turning massive amounts of sugar and converting that into fat. Within 40 minutes, your caffeine absorption is complete, your pupils dilate, your blood pressure rises, and then your liver starts to dump even more sugar into your bloodstream. Around 45 minutes, you increase the dopamine production in the brain, which actually stimulates that pleasure center, that pleasure cortex, which is a physically identical response to that of heroin. It follows the same kind of trigger of those pleasure centers, which is why it makes it so highly addictive. Because then after 60 minutes, you start to crash again, and you need that pickup all over again. So this is when we're seeing kind of this yo-yo up and down. And it's not that after the crash, they'll grab another pop. They'll often grab something sweet or a cookie or a treat or something again. And I think of all of this programming that sweet tooth really, really early on. It made me so upset with those baby foods. I feel like the slide is a paparazzi for some reason. Yes, cheeses?
Juices?
Oh, juices? Yeah, a lot of the juices would. So it's a slower, when it's a natural, so a lot of the most of them from concentrate. It's just glucose syrup they've added in, identical response. But a lot of the fructose in like natural fruit sugar, it's not as severe, so it goes to the liver first, but think the fructose, the corn is fructose, right? It's high fructose corn syrup. So it is the same response. It's not as severe, it's slower, but eventually, yes, it gets there over time. It depends on how high the fructose component was. So fruits are one we would want to watch out for a little bit too. The juices especially, because they don't have the fiber to slow it down. Just a little glimpse of sugar in common foods that you're seeing. So anywhere from like the Frosted Flakes cereals, 3 teaspoons in just a 3/4 cup. The Lipton iced tea, I have a lot of kids that are trying, these poor kids, they're trying. They're like, no, I don't drink pop, I'm trying to do the tea instead. More sugar than the pop, 13¼ teaspoons, and the Coke has 10 teaspoons. So again, it's really about the lack of education out there. The most shocking that I saw, the McDonald's triple thick shake, this is the large size, 42 teaspoons of sugar, 42 teaspoons of sugar. Just crazy the amounts that you're seeing out there. So according to the USDA, it's 36 2-kilo bags for every one of us that we're actually consuming, or that's a 5-pound bag for the Canadian crowd. We think that we are per year. We think we're better than the States, but we're not. We're probably eating about the same. So general guidelines you want to follow for kids. You want to make sure you satisfy their thirst with water. A lot of the times it's just that they're thirsty. A lot of the times that craving is coming because of the thirst signal. Be a good role model. You cannot expect a kid to, follow a pristine diet if you're not modeling that in the home. If everything they look at when they open in the pantry is just sugary snacks or, prepared or processed foods. Serve several small snacks, it seems, again, for kids because their energy bursts are so frequent. Small, scattered meals versus the 3 larger meals, much, much better for kids. Minimize distractions, take away no phone, no electronics, nothing while you're eating. It really should be about that rest and digest component. Integrate your vegetables, make it fun, kind of be creative and involve the child as much as possible. And then this is an ad that I dug up at 2 of them. You should see the next one. But from the 50s. It was from the 50s. And this one says, why we have the youngest customers in the business. So this young man is 11 months old, and he isn't our youngest customer by any means. For 7-Up is so pure, so wholesome, that you can even give it to babies and feel good about it. Look at the back of a 7-Up bottle. Notice that all the ingredients are listed. This isn't required of soft drinks, but we're proud to do it, and we think you're pleased that we do. By the way, Mom, it's a great recipe. When it comes to toddlers, if they like to be coaxed to drink their milk, try this. Add 7-Up to the milk in equal parts, pouring the 7-Up gently into the milk. It's a wholesome combination, and it works. Make 7-Up your family drink. You like it, and it likes you. So creepy. And not to pick on 1950s. I don't know the exact year, it was the 50s. And not to pick on 7-Up, of course, Coke did it too. You can see, promotes active lifestyle, boosts personality, gives body essential sugars. When does sugar become an essential nutrient for a kid? And this is, for a better start in life, start cola earlier. How soon is too soon? Well, not soon enough. Laboratory tests. Some testing that they did over the last few years have proven that babies who start drinking soda during the early formative period have a much higher chance of gaining acceptance and fitting in during those awkward preteen and teen years. So do yourself a favor, do your child a favor. Start them on a strict regimen of sodas and other sugary carbonated beverages right now for a lifetime of guaranteed happiness. Soda Pop Board of America. Hilarious. So definitely, they actually used to sell the little nipple attachments to the bottles too. They're like little rubber attachments, so you could just feed them the bottle. Hilarious. So I thought I'd share that with you. So that is it for today.